is sponsored in loving memory of James, a bright, kind, and deeply loved young man whose character and spirit continue to inspire those fortunate enough to have known him. His mom shares that February is an especially meaningful month as James' birthday is February 5th. This year, he would have turned 22. Honoring him during this birthday month is a way to keep his memory close, to celebrate the joy that he brought, and to acknowledge the lasting imprint he left on every heart that loved him. She also shares that the stories told on Always Andy's mom have been a light in the darkness of grief. Being part of this community has offered support and a sense of connection, reminding her that she's not walking this path alone. She is grateful for this space where grieving parents lift one another up for the opportunity to honor James in a way that may bring hope to others. Today, we hold James's light with tenderness, gratitude, honoring the love, strength, and goodness he brought to the world. This is from Lisa Hughes in honor of her son, James. Thank you so much. Well, this is a little different setting for us in the podcast, and I'm Gwen Kapcia. For those of you who are regular listeners, you see me probably every 6 weeks or so doing a live stream with Mercy where we have conversations around different topics of grief. Walking beside bereaved people for 38 and a half years is all I've ever done. I'm not the expert. You are. You have taught me, and I have learned so much from walking alongside people. But in my career, I've gathered a lot of educational tools about grief, and many times grief is just really intuitive, where we just get support, we talk to people, it's a very natural thing. But there are sometimes that we actually need instruments to help us, instruments of education, handouts, maybe an assignment. Some of you are real instrumental grievers that you want those things. And so in the next 4 weeks, what we're going to be able to do is provide an opportunity for instrumental grieving, for you to be able to have some of these tools available to you. So I'm just going to start off with just kind of giving you an overview of this month of February. This episode will be just some intro stuff about a broader framework of loss, why it's so hard. And then next week, we'll look at some special factors that influence our grief, along with what the experts say we need in order to heal. From there, we will go into maybe some obstacles that make grief very difficult, depression, guilt, anger, loneliness, those sorts of things. And then lastly, we'll just talk about long-range goals for recovery. How do we basically turn our triangle right side up when we're teetering on a point and find some stability in life again? And so hopefully you'll find these helpful, and I'll give you more resources at the end of the episode. But for now, I'm just going to dig in and talk to you and teach about today's topic of why this is so hard. Now, when I started this job, I was given a folder. And the folder said grief recovery. And the woman at hospice said, I'd like you to teach a grief recovery class. And I thought, okay. And I started doing some research, and we didn't have Google back then in 1987. I went to the library, I did some studying, and found out that the word recovery and the recovery model is bringing someone back to a level of homeostasis, which is where they were before. So we provide enough cure that we get them back to where they were before this happened. And there's a lot of people said you don't recover from grief. And I agree. We are never the same. We're changed forever. And so I didn't really like the word grief recovery because I'm thinking we don't really recover. So then I looked up a few other words revolving that, like what is the word that we would use? So I looked up the word resolve. And the word resolve had 3 definitions in good old Webster Dictionary. And it said to analyze the parts of something. The Latin root word of the word resolve means to loosen or relax, okay? Just to resolve and to loosen. And in music, it means to bring from dissonance to consonance, which is the lack of harmony into harmony. And I thought, I kind of like that definition, right? Because recovery really doesn't fit here. We're not going back, but do we need to analyze the parts of something? Yes. And that's what I do in these educational pieces, is kind of help analyze all the parts of our grief. And then the root word of loosening and relaxing, how many times does grief just bind us up in a knot? Like you can feel it in your whole body. And so what we begin to do when we learn these things is we begin to loosen and relax because we realize there's nothing wrong with us and that we're very, very normal. And in music, that bringing from dissonance to consonance, the lack of harmony into harmony, your life doesn't have harmony right now since your child has died, since this has happened to you. And I can't bring the tune back, nor can anyone else that was there before. But can we find some harmony again? A rhythm, a peaceful movement that just brings us to a place where we can go, okay, this is our new harmony. So right now, many of you are in the early stages of complete, total lack of harmony. Some are in the middle and some are finding those rhythms and harmony again. But I do think this fits as we integrate living in two realities. And so I don't mind the definition of the word resolve. And I think this is what we're going to accomplish in the next few weeks together. Now, the focus of the podcast is for bereaved parents, right? Grieving a child loss is the title of this. But I just want to give a quick, broader framework of loss because death isn't the only loss that people experience. There can be divorce, separation, falling in love, marriage, role reversals, the birth of a child, those sorts of things. And you think, how can some of these things that seems like good things in life, marriage or falling in love, bring a loss? But I remember that when my husband and I got married, it was one of the first times in 1987 that they had the unity candles and your parents came up and lit, his parents lit that candle and my parents lit mine. And then during the service, we joined our two candles and lit one. And then we were supposed to blow out our candle and leave the one lit, the unity candle. So when it came that part in the ceremony, Gwen couldn't blow out her candle. My husband blew out his, put it back, and I just set mine back. And he's looking at me like, you forgot something. You forgot to blow it out. And I remember thinking, I don't want to blow out Gwen. I like Gwen. I don't want her to go anywhere. So I want to marry you, but I don't want to lose me. So I didn't blow out the candle and I just left it lit. And so that was just the loss of my life is different now because I am joined and making decisions with somebody else. We talk about role reversals, and I do remember experiencing this with my parents. When my children were very young, we went to the zoo with my parents, and my daughter loved monkeys, and she would sit and stare at the monkeys. And my dad was a very fast-paced, type A personality. Let's go. And we stood at the monkeys for the longest time, and he said, "What is she doing?" I said, "Dad, she loves monkeys." He said, "Look, you see one monkey, you see them all," and he grabbed her hand and dragged her away. I thought, well, wow. But then several years later, when my daughter was a young adult, my dad was well into his 80s, more than halfway through his 80s. We went to the same zoo. We were getting ready to leave, and my dad was just standing at the giraffes, and my kids were like, "Come on, what's Grandpa doing?" So I went over there, and I said, "Dad, what are you up to?" And he said, "These animals are so magnificent. These giraffes, they're beauty." And I said, "Look, a wise person told me once, you've seen one giraffe, you've seen them all, let's go." So we got to the end of the zoo, and I went to get the car, and I just started to cry. And I was just bawling, and I realized that the last time we were at that zoo, it was my children who could stand in awe and wonder, and my dad who was just ready to keep going. And now it was the opposite. My dad could stand in awe and wonder. My children were like, "Let's get through this zoo." The other part was the reason I was going to get the car and leaving them at the gate was not because I had 3 children under the age of 5. It's because I had 80-some-year-old parents who needed me to go get the car. And life had changed. And some of you understand that. So those are like loss of relationships. But then we also have some aspect of loss of ourselves. And we can lose a piece of us. If you've been chronically ill, if you have MS, fibromyalgia, depression, something that every day you wake up and go, have I lost a functionality? Will I ever get that back? And you experience all these losses of some aspect of yourself. We can lose our self-esteem. We can lose our belief system, right? That we believe that things are good and fair, or that schools are safe, or things happen in this world. And we go, I used to believe that, now I can't. And those are losses of our belief system. Being fired from a job, changing jobs. It's so interesting because if you ever think about your first day on a new job, more than the first day, where you just feel so inadequate. Like they have to teach you everything, where to hang your coat, where to, check in and out. You do this, you do that. And you think, am I ever going to know this? And you're like, I don't know if I can do this job. But before you know it, it becomes natural and you get it. But those first days, you feel so inadequate. But being fired from a job, changing a job, all shakes some aspect of ourselves. Something a little more deep than that of being raped or abused, where someone violates you and they come in and take something that does not belong to them. That's an aspect of ourselves that we can lose. There are external losses, being robbed, destruction through tornado, floods, hurricanes, fires, ice storms, things that are going on that you just have no control over, and you have those external losses, and everything could be gone or damaged forever. And then there's developmental losses, childhood, puberty, retirement, empty nest, aging, and illness. And all of them have losses in them and definite changes. But what I'd like to do next is just take a closer look at aspects of loss that we don't always talk about, just a little deeper. The loss of ourself when somebody dies is we feel like a part of us died too, right? Like it's not just them who died. There was a piece of us that's gone forever. And it affects our identity that we say, who am I now without this person? Like, am I still a mom? What do I do? How do I respond to this? I have widows who say, I still feel married. I don't know who I am. If you've been a long-term caregiver, you might have lost your role in your job. The other part of some aspect of ourselves is we lose confidence. We feel unwhole or incomplete, and so we just don't feel right. Then there's physical symptoms that affect who we are. The lethargy of grief, the heaviness in your chest, the difficulty breathing, the difficulty sleeping, the brain fog, forgetfulness. There's an actual lethargy of grief where your body just doesn't work the way that it used to. And so familiarize yourself with some of those responses so you know that aspect of yourself, it's very natural and normal to be having those reactions. But the one that I just want to talk about for a moment is our personality. It changes, right? We don't feel like ourselves. I'm just not me anymore. And you have to rediscover who you are. And I'm going to share a story now and throughout this whole time. And I want you to know that I have asked people's permission to share from their example. They are just so brave to allow me to do that. And I appreciate it very, very much. And so I just don't want you to think that if you've ever shared a story with me, I'm going to share it online to thousands of people without asking you. So I just appreciate the fact that they've allowed me to do this. But I had a dad whose child died, and he said, I don't know how to come home from work anymore. I drive around sometimes for an hour before I can drive in the driveway and go in the house. I just don't know. And I said, well, tell me about that. He said, you see, I was the fun dad. And I would come home, and my routine after coming home was just playing with the kids. If my wife was getting dinner ready or doing things around the space, just kind of giving her that time, and I would play with the kids. He said, now I don't feel like playing. Or do they feel like playing? And if I do play with them because they want to, and I feel like maybe I should, how is my wife going to feel about hearing that laughter and realizing that our other child is not there? So he said, I don't even know how to come into my own house anymore. So we lose an aspect of ourselves that says, who am I now? And I don't know how to do this anymore. So it does affect who we are and what we believe about ourselves. Our loss of security, emotional security. Grieving is a complex time of need, and nobody likes to be needy. There was a study done at the University of Kentucky in Louisville, and I think it was Dr. Peasy, and he interviewed, I can't remember, I think it was 10,000 people, if they'd rather give help or get help. And 9,999 of them said they would rather give help than ask for help. No one likes to be needy, and grief is just such a time of so many needs. And it's difficult. And there's this emotional upheaval that happens. Maybe your friend is and confidant is gone. Maybe the person who died was the person that you trusted the most. There was a term in the 1880s for this when someone experienced a death. and they had emotional upheaval. They were called in a state of morb, MORB, which meant temporarily melancholy. So everybody knew they're in a state of morb. And we don't use terms and words like that anymore, do we? So we're not always aware of why we're so melancholy, but we're in a state of really not being emotionally secure. Physical security. We can worry about being alone. We worry about not being safe. We worry about many, many things. And it was interesting because George Burns, after his wife Gracie died, he said, "I sleep with the light on." Someone questioned him and he said, "The world's not safe for me without her in it." And she died in her 50s and he lived to over, I think, 100, 101, and he still slept with the light on because he did not feel physically secure without her. Then there's fiscal security if our finances change. And then there's a lifestyle change, right? If you go from married to single, if you go from being a family of this many and you have a child that dies, I look at that lifestyle a little bit different too. If we dig down closer, maybe you were a family who camped with a whole bunch of families and you lined up your campers and you had these things and your child dies and you go, do we fit there? Do we want to go there? I don't know how to, do they understand me? Do we belong? So we begin to have the whole lifestyle thing. Like where do we fit? Maybe your child was in gymnastics or hockey and you belong to this club. And every weekend you are with these people and your child dies and that whole lifestyle is different now. You don't have those same activities. So that loss of security of what we did on the weekends, what our family would do, changes. Then this last one is the loss of meaning. What does life mean? Goals, dreams. We imagine traveling, watching our children grow up, and all those things when they're gone are just shattered, right? When we lose our hopes and dreams, we grieve. And so it just cuts at what we had hoped and just look forward to. And then we can lose our faith. Where is God when all this happens? What does our belief system? It's very natural to question that, and to all of a sudden go, wait a minute, life had meaning for me, and now I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure that I believe this anymore. And then here's another one that's pretty serious, but we lose our will to live, and that's a little different than being suicidal. Being suicidal is when someone is thinking about death, a means about ending their own life. And if that is you, we need to reach out for help. You can go to a hospital. You can, text 988 to talk to somebody. You can please reach out. But what I'm talking about is when bereaved people just go, I don't even want to get up tomorrow. It's not that you're actively thinking about dying or a way to end your life, but you just don't even imagine how you can go on. When my father-in-law died suddenly, my mother-in-law was left alone, and she lives across the street, and she'd come over and she'd say, I'm going to go home now. And she said, well, the kids would say, see you tomorrow, Grandma. And she'd say, yeah, if I live that long, if I have to live that long, I'll see you tomorrow. And the kids said, Mom, you have to help Grandma. She's suicidal. And I said, it's not that Grandma wants to die tonight. She just doesn't know how to live through till tomorrow and just doesn't have the will and desire to. It's very, very natural, but it's not something we often talk about. So when it happens, it is scary to be able to say, hey, just don't care. Joy and happiness seem to be like life's most meaningful emotions, right? That's what everybody aims to be. We just want to be happy, and we want that. So when death comes and violates us and rips our guts out, we just don't have that same joy and meaning. And bereaved people live a very long time without that. There is a word for that, and it's called anhedonia, where the things you used to find joy and pleasure, and you just don't find pleasure. You just don't ever have that moment where you go, oh, life is good, right? Dopamine is this release that just something that makes us feel good, that we enjoy. It could be a warm, hot shower. It could be your cup of coffee in the morning that you just sit down. It's all these things. It's some things that aren't necessarily good for us, right? Drugs and alcohol, too much chocolate, things like that just give us that dopamine rush. But oftentimes it's the people in our family and our life that we love, that we go out all day and do all the things we have to do. But then when we come home to our house with our people, we go, oh, this is my space. But when someone has died and there's that void in your family, you don't realize that you've lived a long time without ever having that sense of, oh, life is good. So you're living in a state of anhedonia where you just don't have that. And that changes the meaning in which we have in life. Most of you are living this if you're listening. Maybe you're a helper and a support, but you have to know that grief is so painful for all the reasons we just mentioned and many more. It confuses, it requires patience and acceptance of self, and certainly the support of others to make it through. We are not meant to do this alone. It's a very individual process. It's different for everybody. There's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no proper length of time. Doug Manning, in his book, Don't Take My Grief Away From Me, and says, grieving is as natural as bleeding when you're cut, sneezing when your nose itches, or yawning when you're tired. All those things seem like natural responses, right? If you start bleeding, you get a paper cut, you go, oh, look, I'm bleeding. But when our heart is broken, grieving and that pain is just as natural as bleeding, sneezing, or yawning. But yet we fight it. We go, oh, what's wrong with me? Something must be wrong. And we look at others and think, well, you better get yourself together. We don't do that if someone sneezes. You don't say, what's wrong with you? I thought you'd be done with that by now. Why are you still sneezing? Don't do that. But we do with grief. And it's so interesting to me. The word bereavement literally means to be torn apart. To be torn apart. Ripped in two. The Latin root word says something ripped from you. Something ripped from you. And if you think about if you've ever worked in a daycare or a church nursery or watched somebody's child where they drop their child off and the child does not want to leave their parent, and you literally have to peel that child away from the parent, and it's just this ripping. They're in protest. I want my mom. I want my dad. You're in protest. Something has been ripped from you that you want, and you're screaming, no, 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 no. Now, there's many terms with grief. There's many words that we use, but I just want to clarify something right now, that the word grief is a personal pain and remembering. It's like what happens on the inside, and everybody grieves, right? Everybody has that. But the word mourn, M-O-U-R-N, is the outward expression. It's a public manifestation of individual grief. And so grief is a personal pain. It's on the inside. Mourning is the outward expression. When I use these words intermittently, I know what they both mean, but it's just natural. Sometimes I say mourning, sometimes I say grieving, but there is a difference because not everybody grieves, but not everybody mourns. But we have the necessity to mourn when someone's no longer there. When we love somebody, I think it's Alan Wolfelt in one of his books says, if you have the ability to love someone, you have the necessity to mourn when they're no longer there. And you've heard all these, memes and things out there that, grief is the price that love must pay, those kinds of things. It's true. It's because we love that we grieve and we mourn. The only other term that I do want to just talk about is trauma. And there's many things that make grief traumatic, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But trauma is a violation. It's a wounding of our beliefs, our sense of security, our assumptions about our safety in the world. Trauma is an injury. It's something very hurtful. And even an acute medical death can be traumatic. And I'm not going to go into all the different ways of and dig into traumatic loss, but some of you have to know that you have a key component to your grief and mourning because of the level of trauma. So I just want to say that. And if you have questions about that, maybe we can discuss that later. But grief is a normal process, but what it's not is it's not predictable. It's painful. There's nothing quick, easy, and efficient about grieving. You can be good one moment and not the next. Do you ever have that where you can talk about it and it almost sounds bearable or seems bearable, like I can do this, and the next moment it's completely intolerable and you're like, I can't do this. I can't speak. I can't say anything. I can't be in this environment, whatever that is, and you have to leave, where last week you made it through the entire event or whatever it was. It's not linear. There's no magical end. But we have a modern understanding of grief. Our social cultural assumption is back to what we talked about is like some recovery model, right? Have you ever heard the word closure, letting go? There is no closure. And many times our culture wants to make normal grief responses pathological. And so that's what's leading us into what else I want to talk about today is why grief is so hard. It's the hardest thing we've ever done. And people go, I don't understand. So there's things that help and things that hinder. And something that helps, it makes something easier, it improves, there's benefits in it. But something that impedes our grief and hinders it, it obstructs, it prevents, it delays. And I'd like you just to take a moment and think like, what has hindered me? What has obstructed my grief? What has delayed my grief? And then also take a moment, share with a friend something that's helped you. Like you can look and go, wow, that's really helped. But right now, I just want to talk about some things that have hindered us or could have. You might not have any of these or relate to these, but I think you'll have at least some of them. One of the things in our culture that is in our society that, hinders grief is the fact that we live in a mobile, uprooted society. People's circle of close friends is shrinking. We're not as personal and intimate in relationships anymore. And I do believe that even though we seem more connected with social media and, Facebook and all these ways to connect with people from out of state or out of town, that we get these praying hands and the like button and the little heart, but really does that replace human connectedness of someone calling you up and saying, how are you doing? Or I was thinking about you. I mean, we used to have to pay really big long distance bills to call somebody up. It was a commitment, but that was the only way we could find out how they were doing. We go to a store, buy a card, write our notes on it, take it to a post office, put a stamp on it and send it. Someone will go out to their mailbox, open it up and know that you took that time. And it equaled something. And now in our fast-paced society, we get, a few praying hands a day. And I'm a person of prayer. I'm not saying that's bad. But are they really praying for you? And the heart button, okay, there's the love, but do you really feel it? So we're really disconnected. We don't have the same close support system. The census in 1950 showed that 45% of all grandparents lived within 4 blocks of their grandchildren. In 2000, it went down to 25%. And in 2010, it went down to below 10%. And the results in that category, the last I looked for the 2020 census were not out. Sometimes it takes a good 10 years to get those results. But here's another thing I always say. Our neighborhoods are not the same. We just do not live in the same connectedness of big porches and all the kids playing outside and riding their bikes. We're more into ourselves and doing our own things. And sadly enough, inside playing video games rather than your whole neighborhood out on the street playing kickball. And, if your parents would say, hey, when you're out on your bike, Mrs. Jones is lonely. Her husband died. Stop in and say hello. And you'd stop in and you'd basically say, my mom and dad told me you're lonely and I got to visit with you, even though we didn't want to. But, sometimes it was fun because Mrs. Jones would make you, a sweet tea or something, and you could sit and have those conversations, right? So there's just things that are happening that are different in our world. And I look at this, I watch HGTV, and everybody, when they look for a house, they want a house that is open on the inside. They want all this open concept. I don't know where all these hospitable people come from, but everybody wants this open concept. But when they go outside and look at the house, they say to the realtor, oh, we need a fenced in, closed off backyard. We want all our openness on the inside and our closedness on the outside. And that works great when life is good. But when life is bad, and we realize we're not connected to people at all. We open up our garage door, we pull in our garage, we shut the garage door, and our neighbors don't even see us get out of our car. They don't even know what we look like, to the point that 71% of all Americans do not know who their neighbors are. So when something happens, it is makes it difficult. And we also live in a mourning avoidant culture. One European author said the thing you got to realize about Americans is they think death is optional. Excuse me, this is a lot of talking. We're stuffy Americans. It is a Western thing that we believe that pain and suffering are bad realities and that something is wrong with us. Other parts of the world allow for suffering. And so it's just so interesting that we don't. Here's another thing that makes it really difficult, is the pressure to heal quickly. Now, if I were to ask you how long the average population gives someone to bereaved, what would your answer be? Some people are really generous and say, oh, months or a year, 6 months. But really, the truth is about 3 days to 2 weeks. If you look at your bereavement leave from work, how long do they give you off for the death of a child? Sometimes it's just a couple of days, and you're expected to be, quote, back to normal. I'll use myself as an example. And again, I'm not trying to trigger anybody. I'm just randomly picking myself in this example that, let's say I have a child who dies now and it is February, February. And I'll be really generous and give me till Halloween. And I'm in the store at Halloween and I see all the Halloween candy and I start to cry. And a friend could come up to me in the grocery aisle and see me crying, and they could do everything right. Look me in the eye, no judgment, no shame, and just listen, right? But 9 times out of 10, that friend goes back to the book club, the Bible study, or however they know me, and they say, I saw Gwen at the grocery store and she's not doing very well. She's really losing it. She was just standing in the candy aisle, crying her eyes out. But isn't that normal? Isn't that what happens? Like, I don't understand how that then becomes. And you know that you get these messages, whether someone clearly says it to you or they just inadvertently give you that, like, well, you kind of have to wrap this up. I'm worried about you. You begin to think, I can't show anyone who I am. And that's why bereaved people isolate and cut themselves off, because they realize that people don't understand them. Now, my husband and I suffered for years with infertility, and we finally got pregnant. We had a tubal pregnancy, so the baby's not viable. And so I had to have surgery. And I had the surgery on a Thursday, and I was working for a man who helps support bereaved people. And the next day he called, and he said, well, and I thought he was calling to see how he was doing, right? To say, just, checking in. I know your child died yesterday. But he said to me, I won't take long because I know you had a slight procedure yesterday. He called the death of our child a slight procedure. That I just thought, if he doesn't get it, nobody gets it, right? They don't understand. There's so many medical advances in our world today where people are just doing these least invasive, best ways to make it so that you don't have to miss much work. You don't have a lot of scars. There's all this robotic surgery. I'm really happy for all that. But what it's doing, I think, is it's putting so much emphasis on recovering quickly and not missing a beat, that it's great when we can do that physically and they can take your gallbladder out and you can go back to work so quickly with no little scars, just a few little dots around your belly button. But there's no way to least invasively grieve the death of someone we love who's no longer here. There's no quick way to do that. And so if we're not allowing for physical healing, we're not saying, hey, take 6 weeks off work and rest, then we're not allowing for emotional healing. Friends and family and people expect us back to life, to work, and they feel uncomfortable around us when we're grieving. And so that makes it very, very difficult. Another thing that makes it difficult is past experiences with pain. Maybe you've never had someone close to you die before. Maybe you haven't had this happen and you have nothing to fall back on, and it just blows your world. Some of you may be on what we call bereavement overload, where you're just getting up and then wham, something else happens. And I met someone recently who said, well, in the last 6 years, I've gone to 16 funerals. I'm like, okay, that's a lot of close family members. Some of us grew up in an environment in which showing our pain was not acceptable. We were not allowed to express ourselves or feel those things. So when grief and anger and pain comes, we go, we don't know how to do that. Or maybe there's so many rules in our family that of what we should do and expectations and things that we keep, like we don't go there. We don't talk about that. I had to watch a lot of, as most parents do, a lot of Disney animated films, and I'm starting to get to the point that I might miss them and want to go back to them, but for a long time, I really didn't. But one of the last ones that I saw with my kids was Inside Out. And it's a girl who moves, and she's on her first day at her new school, and here comes all of her train of thought and all of her feelings. And here comes sadness on her first day of school, and the sadness is walking in. And the brain draws the circle and says, sadness, Your only job is to make sure all the sadness stays in the sadness circle. Wouldn't that be interesting if that was possible for us to keep all of our sadness in our sadness circle? I'm sorry if you're hearing a squeak, but watching someone's dog, and I did not know that there were some squeak toys around, and so I'm really sorry about that. Just so you're not wondering like what's going on, if a timer's going off at my house. And for those of you who don't know me, I want to tell you I'm not an animal person, and I don't like animals, so this is really a stretch for me. But anyway, other pressure that we have or experiences with pain maybe is a lot of the messages that we're given. And if we're people of faith, maybe your faith community has a lot of, well, choose joy and, look for the good, and God's going to use this, or things that are unbiblical, that God doesn't give you more than you can handle. That makes it really hard, because that's not true. That's not true. So that can impede our grief. We as Americans have been sheltered from death. We have de-ritualized weddings and funerals. Processionals used to happen, and the reason for processionals is it was intended to slow down traffic. And you know why we don't do processionals anymore and honor a life going from the funeral home to the cemetery? Because it slows down traffic, and no one wants to be slowed down in today's world. As recent as the 1960s, the bodies were left in the home, and someone had to stay awake all the time, and they left children to do the night watch because children could stay up longer than the adults and play around. The adults slept and the children stayed up. And now I probably get a call, I'd say once a week, about whether their children should go to the funeral or not. That we protect children. We don't want them to see pain and sadness. And so we've sheltered them from that, where they used to just be part of it and knew that death was a part of life. We lack traditions, rituals, and symbols that go along with the faith. Families don't eat together, let alone hurt and heal together, right? We have to have built-in systems where your family can gather when life is good, so that when life isn't good, we know what to do. And I'll just throw in something about kids right now with the symbols and rituals and traditions. I know that we live in a fast-paced world, and you've got sporting events, and you throw something in the crock pot. But I've discovered in an unscientific study of asking kids where they eat and who eats with them is that a lot of times we're in front of a TV or TV trays, or everyone's kind of on their own. And again, if we're not taking that time to have that place for a safe dialogue when life is good, when life gets bad, we have no built-in place for a safe dialogue. So in our family, we played high-low, and now my great niece has added high-low buffalo, where we say the high points of our day, the low points of our day, and the buffalo is just anything that you want to share. When my son went off to college and came home, he rolled his eyes like, oh, you still play that? When my daughter went off, she'd text in or call her high-low. Keeping that communication open to do that, so that we have those traditions and rituals that say, I know that my family's going to gather every Sunday around the table, and I can be with them and just be where I need to be. In the case of divorce, I just want to throw this in, that there's no formalized ceremony. There's no gathering around the casket of your dead marriage. Our world wants to make it seem like a divorce is natural and not that hard. But let me tell you, there's usually at least one person that's very broken. And if there's children, there's more than one. And people don't bring a casserole. People don't say they're sorry. They send you a card that says you didn't need that person anyway. Or they have these parties that say, you're done with that. There is a grief, and it makes it very hard. Another thing that can make grief hard is that some losses are socially unmentionable. We just don't know how to talk about them. We don't share them with anyone. It used to be AIDS was that way. Suicide, stillbirth. You didn't know the child. So people diminish you and disenfranchise you because they just basically say, well, you didn't have any memories with that child. Infertility. What about, how do you talk about if your child died from a sexual game or choking or something? I mean, how do you share that? You don't. So they become unacceptable or unmentionable in our culture, and that can hinder how we grieve. The circumstances surrounding the death are something, I think next week we'll look a little closer at that, but I just want to give the 5 right now. A sudden death, doesn't, you know what that means? Premature, someone dies before their time. And violent, no body, and intense relationships. So we're going to look at that a little closer next week, I promise. The most common inhibitor, though, if I were to ask you, what do you think is that makes grief the most difficult? Oftentimes, I've never had anyone off the bat give me the correct answer, but oftentimes the one I get in this situation is drugs or alcohol. So if you imagine the well of sorrow being down here in the valley, in the pit of pain, we think of something that inhibits is when we take drugs or alcohol to kind of what I think is to dig a hole around it and try to avoid that, right? Like, here's the pain. I don't want to feel it, so I'm going to do that. And that can inhibit our pain. Another thing, and I mentioned being a person of faith, but we give a lot of faith messages that somehow think we can celestially fly over the well of sorrow and land on the shores of choosing joy, and all things work together for good. And even though we believe those principles, it doesn't necessarily pan out in life how we do that. So we inhibit people if we think that there is a way around this. But the most number one inhibitor when you're dealing in the depths of your sorrow and you're drowning in that well, it's I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know it was going to feel like this. I had no idea. I didn't know this was normal. And should I be responding this way? And we begin to question everything we think and feel. We didn't know we'd talk to them. We didn't know we'd call their voicemail to hear their voice. We didn't know we'd sleep with our child's sweatshirt. Married people, I had one woman say she didn't change her sheets for 8 months because they still smelled like her husband. I had one woman say she took her coat, hung it next to her husband's coat, wrapped the arms of his coat around her coat just to experience him hugging her one more time. Just to envision that. I had one gentleman who got up at 3 a.m. because he realized it had been 5 days since he had seen another human, and he was so lonely. Now, his adult children were more upset that he got up at 3 in the morning and did that than for the reason why. The woman who didn't change her sheets for 8 months, her child wanted to do an intervention. That's so gross. You didn't wash your sheets for 8 months. But you get in a support group full of bereaved people and they say, you are so lucky that in 8 months they still smell like your husband, right? So all of a sudden, when you're around bereaved people, before that, you feel like you're going crazy if you tell people what you're doing. I go to the cemetery every day. I talk to them. I look at the picture. I light a candle, whatever it is that you do. But you tell people who don't get it, who are not walking that road, and you think, I must be losing my mind. But when you're with other bereaved people, you go, oh yeah, I'm not so crazy. So just knowing what to expect is a big part of that. And there's no way to prepare. No one ever comes into the death of somebody ready. Like, oh, I know what this is going to feel like and what it's all about. So don't think you did anything wrong, because there's no way to prepare for that. That's why we often call grief a journey. And that's why I talk about the things that I do in my work is guiding people through grief, because no one came prepared. If I said to you, you have to climb a mountain tomorrow, you would get a backpack, you'd get a water bottle, you'd look at the route, you'd figure it out. You'd be like, how am I going to do this? Right? But you're not just going to go, oh, okay, I'll do that tomorrow. But with grief, no one gives you a backpack, a water bottle, says, hey, here's a route. And that's what I try to do in these educational things and the videos I've produced and things like that, just to help people get some of those things, because you did not come prepared for this journey, the most difficult journey. Now, I don't have to tell you what grief feels like. You know what it feels like for you. There just are no words. But here's a few things that I just want to share that I share often in examples. And this one I've shared on the podcast before, and it's got an interesting twist to it. So I always tell people that grief is so much like Space Mountain, right? Where you are on a roller coaster. If you've ever been to Space Mountain in Disney World, it's different than other roller coasters where you can kind of see the hills and what to expect. It's more of a it's inside. You can't see it. You can't prepare. So you get on it and it's like click, 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 click. And you don't know if you're going to go left, right, up or down. And it was very jarring. You couldn't lean into it. And if you think about the roller coasters, they usually give you warnings. Like if you have a bad back, if you're pregnant, if you have a bad heart, don't go on this. The other thing that they do is they put that big harness that puts yourself in a good position, your body, so that your neck doesn't get injured, and it kind of positions you, right? So they kind of set you up for that. But on our grief journey, what's positioning us? And that's what I, again, look at as guiding people through grief is kind of, I can't change the journey, but if I can get you in a position where you go, okay, Gwen said this might happen, or this is a dip, or man, I got a bad turn coming up. I can't tell you when that happens, but I can help you lean into that. So what's interesting is when I told that story, Marcy said, oh my goodness, Gwen, guess what happened to us when we were on Space Mountain? They were on it as a family, and the ride stopped halfway through, and it broke down, and they turned the lights on. And she said to Eric, look ahead and see what's coming. Like how much longer? What do we have? What's coming up? So that they were prepared, because being in that dark, not knowing which way you're going, is very jarring and very unsettling. No one likes that. And so grief is a lot like that you're just on this ride. So what I want to help you do this week, through all the things we've just shared and the things coming up, is just kind of set you in a position where you can go, okay, this is part of the ride. How can I position myself so that I can go through this? The rule of thumb in grief is the sooner and more intensely you grieve, the sooner you heal. Doing it now rather than is preferred, rather than years of poorly managed grief and saying, I'm not going to go there. I can't look at that. I'm not going to do that. I can't handle that. That makes it too difficult to do. And so don't let the pain of maybe what we've talked about today keep you from listening, because along with the pain that you may feel from really hearing some of these stories and digging in, you're also going to learn some practical tools and things like that. And we want to give you hope. I told you at the beginning, I've been doing this job for 38 and a half years. I could not do it if I didn't have hope that you can have meaningful lives, that your surviving children can have meaningful lives, that your marriage can survive, that your family can find new rhythms, that there will be a harmony again. Because I've seen it so many times with so many brave, amazing families, that I know it's possible. So I can loan that to you when you don't have the hope for that. Years ago, I interviewed for a job. We were moved, and the hospice where I was doing grief work only had enough money to pay me for 12 hours a week, and I did 8 for free. So I worked 20 hours, and I had a lot of time on my hands. We didn't have kids, and my husband was working many hours, so I got a job. I was looking for a job, and I interviewed with a judge to be a probation officer. And he said, well, tell me why you want to be a probation officer. And I said, I really don't. I said, grief is my thing, but I'm bored and I need a job, and I don't want to be a probation officer. And he didn't hire me. No big surprise. But several weeks later, the judge called me and he said, I can't get you out of my mind. And he said, we have a Boys and Girls Club in this town, and we have some kids in our program who are preteens who have already not just misdemeanors, but committed some felonies. We've had some grand theft. We've had, breaking and entering. We've had some things. And we'd like to do a program with them at the Boys and Girls Club, and we need a leader. Teach them about self-esteem, decision-making, coping skills. And I said, that'd be great. I mean, because I kind of do that already. So, okay. So I started that job with these kids. I just have to give you one example. When I said, what motivates you to get good grades? Like, what would be a motivating factor to get an A, B, or even a C? And one kid said, well, if I get a C, I get cigarettes. If I get a B, my parents buy me alcohol. And if I were to get A's, I'd get some harder drug. Seriously. I listened to these stories and I felt so hopeless. And I went to the judge and I said, I can't do this. I can't fight that system of these families and this hopelessness of their situations. And he said, Gwen, you work with bereaved people. You work with hospice when people are dying every day. And you think this is hopeless? I said, yes, I do. because I really do know that people who have devastating losses can go on and live meaningful lives. That I've seen it. I've seen the bounce back. I've seen the resiliency. I've seen the healing. Yes, they're changed forever, but they do come to a place where they can find healing. Now, healing, again, to me does not mean like all things are beautiful and that you don't often hurt. I mean, you still hurt and you think and you miss and you long for and you're changed forever. I get that. But there is hope, and I want to give that to you. So this was a lot for today, but I thank you for sticking in, and I hope you'll join us for the other 3 sessions that follow this. Now, one of the things with helping Marcy out in this time that she is off and we're trying something a little different is that we both wanted to be able to offer you some specials and a chance for me to just teach you a little bit more about what I do. And these videos that I talk about, I have 5 videos on my website at grief-guide.com, but please don't buy online right now because we're offering the listeners a special. If you want to watch these videos in more detail, more examples than what I gave today, you're going to hear a lot of the same stories, but a whole lot more, and handouts and tools and things for you. We'd love to offer that to you at a savings. Then there's also 3 checkpoints that you can purchase with me where you can have 3 sessions with me. The first one is the wound, where you can tell your story. Before you talk about the death, we'll talk about your child's life, what they were like, what they added to your family. Just, listening to Lisa, our sponsor for today, share about James and the love and what he added to their family. That's the beautiful things I get to listen to in that first session before we talk about what happened. The second session is the work that grief requires, the painful things, those emotions, the big feelings. We'll talk about that, how we process them, what we do with them, what our support looks like. And then thirdly, the wonder. I wonder how I'm going to survive. I wonder if we need to move. I wonder how my other children are going to do. I wonder whatever it is you're wondering. We can talk about that. And so I bundled them in what we call 3 checkpoints. You can read a little bit more about them on my website. And then there's a chance to bundle those things together. So as I mentioned, the videos would be a savings of $15. We've discounted the checkpoints of $30 for the 3 sessions, and then we bundled them together for a savings. And so if you're interested in this, you can email Marcy or myself, and we have an outline of how you'd access that and use the codes that we have to purchase on my website with the Always Andy's Mom discount. And then lastly, for those of you who might be a little further out in your journey and you're at the point that you're helping others, I do have a few things on my website that would help. And so if that's you, you can reach out to me, but I have a grief mentor training. If you're to the point where you want to mentor other bereaved people, or some of the listeners have already purchased the weekly support group outline that I have because you want to gather moms together in your community. You're trying to build your support, but you don't know how to start or what to talk about. And so I give you the outline so you can just show up and use the outline. So all those things are available to you. Thank you for listening for that 3-minute sales pitch at the end of all of this, but it just gives an opportunity for you to know a little bit more about what support is out there through your grief guide. I appreciate it. And you're listening. I appreciate Lisa and the honoring of her son on his birthday, February 5th. And I will see you next week.